Okay, our last speaker for the morning is Dr. Brannick. He will be speaking to us on essential oils, which I think is a good topic. I think we as doctors hear about this from patients and family and other people, but not a lot from perspective of physicians. So I'd like to welcome Brannick Riggs.
Good morning. Grateful to be here. So I just want to start off with kind of telling you a little bit about my pathway, how a doctor is here talking about essential oils, because that's, I think, a little bit unique in most of our experience. So I trained at University of Arizona in Tucson under a gentleman by the name of Andrew Weil. Andy Weil is a Harvard-trained physician that is big in the space of complementary and alternative medicine. And my interest in training under Dr. Weil was trying to learn more about phytomedicine, plant medicine. My growing up years were spent traveling through Europe and some of the Middle East, and most of those cultures have that background. And so I was very interested in how most other cultures use plant as medicine. I then trained at the amazing, fabulous McCady Hospital with many of you. It's so good to be presenting and see some familiar faces in the audience that I trained with and that I learned so much from many of you that are out there. Went on to work for IASIS Healthcare for a number of years on their physicians group of Utah, and then joined Revere Health about 5 years ago and worked with Revere Health, what used to be known as Central Utah Clinic, and became a partner there. Recently, this is my disclosure, I left Revere Health and began working for a company called doTERRA. I am their vice president of clinical initiatives and the VP and the chairman of the medical advisory board there. We have about 9 different physicians of different specialties that are our advisory board with that. And then I'm the chief medical director of Prime Meridian. Prime Meridian is an essential oil company or a healthcare company that we aim to develop a primary care system that removes insurance barriers for us and is a membership model. And we're doing some exciting things in that space. We see that the writing's on the wall, that insurance is beginning to have its challenges, kind of pricing itself right out of the possibility for most employers. And so at Prime Meridian, we're working on that. We currently have 3 clinics up and running across the country and have plans for about 30 more in the next 5 years. So excited about that. But so then the question is, I know why I'm here, so why are you here? And often it's when physicians ask another physician to come and talk about essential oils, it's for one of 3 reasons. One, they want to know, what in the world is it that my patients keep talking about with essential oils? Because it seems really weird that they're talking about in a healthcare space they're using oils. Number 2, they're wondering, is there something for me in it? And as I was preparing a lecture a number of years ago, I came across some interesting statistics. 63% of the general working population use some form of natural healing, while 76% of those of us in the healthcare field use some form of complementary medicine. So I guess the dirty little secret is that a lot of us are using some form of natural or complementary medicine in our own healthcare. We're just not talking about it very often at work. The other thing that I found interesting is that doctors and nurses are twice as likely to seek treatment from a massage therapist, acupuncture, or a chiropractor than other healthcare workers. And that they're 3 times more likely to be tapping into natural remedies such as yoga and herbal supplements than those with a lower standard of education. So the truth is, a lot of us in the healthcare industry are using natural things in our own healthcare. Or number 3, you want to poke holes in the fad of essential oils, which is fine. Anytime we're making developments in medicine, we need to have opposition. We need to have people that are saying, well, what about this? What about this? And that's important to develop a healthy system that can benefit patients and cause less harm to them. So many medications that we use every day have their origin in plants. We use atropine in ACLS. It's an anticholinergic, and that comes from a plant called Atropa belladonna, right there. Colchicine, anti-gout medication, anti-tumor medication, comes from autumnale crocus. It's the crocus flowers that you see growing in your yard. That's where that medication derives from. Digoxin comes from Digitalis purpura, which is foxglove. You can see that there are a ton of medications there. Hyoscyamine comes from the Hyoscyamus niger plant, levodopa, mucuna species, Sudafed, which is now somewhat over-the-counter, controlled, I guess, a little bit, but that comes from ephedra or mawang. So in a 10-minute Google search, you can find about 241 different drugs that come from plants. That's all it takes. So the truth of the matter is that much of the pharmaceutical world that we deal with has its root in, no pun intended there, plants. Plants are where we have found our medications for a number of years. From 1970 to 2006, 24 unique natural products were discovered that led to an approved drug in the pharmaceutical industry. Most of those products have adhered to Lipinski's Rule of Five, or now called Pfizer's Rule of Five, for probably some obvious reasons. But they have to do with absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion, and the chemical structures are relatively small and moderately lipophilic. And there's a reason for that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So, Dr. C.D. Verisham at the University College of Pharmaceutical Sciences said, "Nature, the master craftsman of molecules, created almost an inexhaustible array of molecular entities. Even though popularity of the synthetic products increased due to its production cost, time effectiveness, easy quality control, stringent regulation, and quick effects, but their safety and efficacy always remained questionable, resulting in a dependence on the natural products by more than 80% of the total population in the developing world because of its time-tested safety and efficacy." I remember in my training, Dr. Andrew Weil used to say, the largest clinical study in history have been done on natural compounds. Just nobody documented it. When we think that natural compounds have been used as medication since time immemorial, the oldest document that we have is 3000 BC of an essential oil being used to treat a patient's healthcare problems. That means that they've been used for a very long time. Have they been documented? No. And so now we've seen, in the last 10 years, a 400% increase in the medical literature on essential oils. So this is becoming quite ubiquitous and popular. I will tell you that I never imagined this for my life. My schedule has become very interesting. Jason Hogan and I were just talking. I just flew in from Nashville, where I had some conversations with some physicians there. As soon as I got back, I was on the phone with a large cancer hospital in the Midwest that wants to develop a integrative medicine for oncology in their cancer institute. I leave from here this afternoon and fly to Dusseldorf, Germany, where I'm meeting with 3 or 4 physicians, and then from there I go to Budapest, Hungary, and speak with a gentleman that owns a hospital system, a physician that owns a hospital system, that about 10 years ago bought his own farm to make his own essential oils because he couldn't find any that were pure enough to be using in a healthcare system. And since being introduced 2 years ago to the essential oils that are produced at the company that I now work for, he's sold that farm and is interested in us helping with his education of physicians. He has 120 physicians there and would like some education there. I'd like to talk today a little bit about the endocannabinoid system. The reason is it has become quite popular, right? We talk about cannabinoids and cannabis and marijuana and CBD now all the time. We're seeing it in politics. We're seeing it in the medical literature. We're probably now seeing it in patients. I've just dealt with a patient this last week that is on CBD and having some regulatory challenges with the CBD that she's getting. But I wanted to talk a little bit about that since we're kind of all dealing with that and learning about that. So the endocannabinoid system consists of mainly 2 things. It's a network of receptors that are found naturally in the body. These receptors are a part of almost every system in the body, but also helps control vital functions, monitoring appetite, pain, mood, memory. And these receptors are known as the cannabinoid receptors. They're a G protein-coupled receptor located in the cell membrane. And cannabinoid receptors are classified into two groups currently. One is the CB1 receptor, that's mainly in the brain and nervous system, but also found in other organs such as the lungs and kidneys. And number two, the CB2 receptor are mainly expressed as part of the immune system, but also found throughout the body. Generally, the CB1 receptors are thought to act on the central nervous system, while the CB2 receptor acts on the peripheral tissues. So if we can kind of just keep that in mind as we talk about this. For example, the CB2 receptor in animal models have been shown to inhibit inflammation, act as a painkiller, protect the liver and intestines, and act as treatment for diseases such as atherosclerosis and osteoporosis. There are over 113 cannabinoids that have been identified to this point. But today I'm just going to talk about three, probably two that we've heard of before and maybe one that we haven't. These are all phytocannabinoids, so they're found from plants, and they're characterized by their ability to act on the cannabinoid receptors directly or indirectly that are part of our endocannabinoid system. Cannabidiol, CBD, we've heard of that. It does come in an oil. If any of you have some experience with patients that are on CBD or may even at this point be prescribing CBD oil, the problem with CBD oil, of course, is regulation. CBD is not a whole plant extract. It is extracting, it's a CO2 extract that they're getting a specific chemical compound from an overall plant. And because science has not quite caught up with this, they're having difficulty regulating how much THC is in any particular CBD product. But now if you go to the grocery store, you go to Walmart, you go to Harmon's, you go all over the place, you can find all sorts of things that claim that they have CBD in them. The problem is most of those things have been sprinkled with a little bit of fairy dust CBD, not to a point that they can affect the human system at all. It's just very, very minute amounts. THC is the principal psychoactive component of cannabis and has certain medicinal uses, but CBD stands out because of its non-psychoactive component. But it does interact with the CB2 receptor only indirectly. It does not have direct binding to the CB2 receptor. But it still has many potential medical applications. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about CBD is the sheer number and variety of its potential therapeutic applications. It's important to recognize that each application may be supported by different levels of evidence. These range from ongoing clinical trials currently about its efficacy and treatment of the human disorders to animal studies investigating its behavioral and physiologic effects, to in vitro work measuring its pharmacological interactions and mechanism of action. CBD is actually famous for its promise for treating treatment-resistant childhood epilepsy. That's kind of where it's made its news debut, is most of the time when this first came out, we were seeing amazing effects of children with epilepsy that could not be controlled, and when they were given CBD, all of a sudden they would stop seizing. A number of clinical trials affecting or testing the efficacy of CBD in human epilepsy patients are currently underway. But there's also evidence, mainly from animal studies and in vitro experiments, that CBD may have neuroprotective, anti-inflammatory, and analgesic properties, which I think is very relevant to our issue with the opioid epidemic that we're experiencing here in this country. What's the biological basis for this wide range of potential medicinal uses? A key part of the answer lies in CBD's rather promiscuous pharmacology. It does not just bind with the CB2 receptor indirectly. It actually has a host of other receptor systems that it binds to in the body and in the brain. And so we're just now beginning to discover all of the receptors that CBD binds to. So moving on to THC, I'll be very brief about this because really, particularly in the state of Utah, we stay away from THC. Other states have found that they've passed laws to make it recreational to this point. But tetrahydrocannabidiol interacts directly with both the CB1 and CB2 receptors. It's that interaction with the CB1 receptor that gets a psychoactive effect, the high that people are searching for. And anything that contains this compound, particularly in the state of Utah, is a regulatory and legal challenge. And so the current law states that if you have a CBD product in the state of Utah, it must contain less than 0.03% of THC. So that tells you that some THC comes along in any CBD product for the most part. And so we have to be aware of that. And that's actually the issue I've been dealing with this last week is someone tested positive for THC and they were on high doses of CBD, and we had to figure out what was what and whether or not they were using something different than what they had been prescribed. So moving on to the third compound, the phytocannabinoid, I want to talk a little bit about beta-caryophyllene. This is a bicyclic sesquiterpene found in numerous plants, and I'll talk about some of those in a minute. Recently, it's been found to bind to the cannabinoid receptors in the body. Unlike cannabis's THC, though, it does not bind to the CB1 receptor at all. Binds only to CB2 receptor and binds stronger than does the CBD compound that we were talking about earlier. So this data suggests that beta-caryophyllene is a potent promoter of the immune system by that CB2 receptor while avoiding the psychoactive effects of the CB1 receptor. Even the oxidized form of beta-caryophyllene has been shown to have similar properties as the unoxidized form, such as anti-inflammation, analgesic activities, but has been still shown to actually, this one has not been shown to bind to the CB1 receptor or CB2 receptor. When it's oxidized, it finds other receptors to bind to get those effects. So there's some alternate mechanism that is yet to be discovered on beta-caryophyllene in that regards. So here are the essential oils that contain a component of beta-caryophyllene. You can find it in black pepper at about 21%, melissa and ylang-ylang at 13%, clove at 8%, helichrysum at 5%, and juniper berry at 5%. But the highest amount that we find is in copaiba. Now, because I get to travel a bit and talk about this, I'm glad I'm north of the border, because south of the border I have to pronounce it a whole different way, and they get very upset when you call it copaiba. But down south in Mexico City and further south, they call it copaiba. But we'll call it copaiba for today. And that copaiba has about 50% to 70% beta-caryophyllene in it. So it's strongly made of that one specific molecule. There have been over 70 peer-reviewed studies published in scientific journals in the last few years evaluating the benefits of copaiba essential oil, which focuses mainly on its CB2 binding properties and the associated health benefits. So now that we've taken a really close look at an oil and then a chemistry, let's pull back for a minute and take a look at essential oils from a 30,000-foot view. I think that may be a little bit more beneficial for you. This is a picture of Ogden. Beautiful picture. I hike in those mountains right there until I moved recently down to Utah County, but this is home for me. So what are essential oils? Essential oils are natural aromatic compounds found in plants. They're obtained either from steam distillation or they're cold pressed. And the way we decide how to obtain those is based upon the chemistry of the specific oil. Some chemistries, so for instance, when you look at the citrus oils, the chemical bonds break apart. They're too weak when you use steam distillation. The heat breaks apart the chemistry, and so you end up with a very different product than what was made in nature. And so for those, we cold press those particular fruit, the rind of those particular fruits to get the oils, but most other things we get through steam distillation. The picture in the lower left side is a colored electron micrograph of a peppermint leaf. Those large orange-yellow orbs are sacs of oil sitting on the leaf of the plant. This is why when you brush by most herbs, or if you take that leaf and you crush it in your hand, what you're doing is you're crushing those little orbs there and releasing the chemical compounds within that. And that's where you get your smell from. Keep in mind that if someone tells you this is an essential oil and it does not have a smell to it, it's not an essential oil, because every oil that a plant produces is aromatic, having to do with the 5-carbon ring that we'll talk about here in a minute. So if we go back to our organic chemistry, remember way back when we all had to take that for our MCATs, we remember that in organic chemistry classes, almost all organic compounds are made of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen on occasion, and sulfur on occasion. And so we'll talk a little bit about some of the chemical compounds that are made of that. Essential oil chemistry is this: terpenes, alcohols, esters, aldehydes, ketones, phenols, and oxides. That's what your all chemical compounds found in essential oils are made of. We're familiar with those, again, from our own biochemistry and organic chemistry. Terpenes are the largest family of natural products found in essential oils. They're found throughout nature, and they're found in a plant shortly after the plant flowers. That's when it's most concentrated. A basic terpene is C5H8, and that's an isoterpene. And the classes of terpenes are these. You can go monoterpenes, sesquiterpenes. Remember that we talked about CBD as a sesquiterpene molecule. Triterpenes and tetraterpenes, and the list goes on and on and on. So I want to talk about some of my favorites, okay? My favorite monoterpene is camphene. And I admittedly am a little bit of a nerd, so I have a chemistry set in my office, a model chemistry set, and I build these molecules as I'm studying about them so I can kind of see them in 3 dimensions. But camphene is found in ginger. An article recently published in Anesthesia and Analgesia Journal was proposed that the inhalation of ginger oil may reduce postoperative nausea. I have several surgery subspecialty friends who now are using ginger oil before surgery and in the PACU to reduce this challenging issue for them. So it's being used in medicine today. It's being used in some of the hospitals that you all work with and interact with in those systems. The other oil that's commonly used in this same setting is peppermint oil to reduce postoperative nausea. So we'll move on to alcohols. The plants that contain essential oils that have alcohols in them are numerous. I couldn't list them all. So I figured I'd just list the ones that don't have any alcohols with them. That makes it a little bit easier. My favorite alcohol, and that's really weird for someone in my religion to say, but my favorite alcohol is linalool. Linalool has a lot of data behind it. Linalool you can find in rosewood, bergamot, coriander, rose, and jasmine. Now the reason that I like linalool is linalool has been shown to decrease epinephrine in the brain. Epinephrine really spikes when patients have things like anxiety, right? And so we see that linalool and those oils that contain high amounts of linalool in them really help them deal with that anxiety. And we'll talk about a study here in just a minute that highlights that effect. But lavender is the main one that you'll see. Lavender is 25 to 45% linalool acetate and 20 to 47% linalool. Now I understand in medical pharma, we're not comfortable talking about ranges of percentages, right? But if you take an oil and you say this is the exact amount of linalool in it, it's not a natural compound. That variation is going to change somewhat from year to year and from season to season as to how much that plant produces. And so when we talk about oils, we talk about ranges of chemistry, not specific numbers of chemistry within it. But I don't like the smell of lavender. Lots of people are using it for sleep. I don't really like it. So knowing the chemistry of oils, I look for what other oils have that same compound in it. So I use an oil called petitgrain for sleep. It has 42% linalool in it, and I can get the same effect without the flowery, and pardon me ladies, but girly smell to it. And so petitgrain has much more of a pepper scent to it, and I don't mind that one nearly as much as I mind the flowery smell of lavender. So then the question is, are these oils just a nice smell, or is it real chemistry? So one of the studies that I wanted to highlight to end the conversation today is this one. It's a product called Silexan, and now there's a copy product called Calm, K-A-L-M, out of Europe. Most of these studies were done in Vienna and Germany, but it's a product that you can now buy over the counter for most pharmacies in Europe. There are several studies that support the use of 80 milligrams of lavender for generalized anxiety disorder, PTSD, insomnia, and depression. So let's take a look at just one of those. This is a study in which they studied paroxetine versus Silexan. And here's a couple of highlights. In the present trial, only negligible treatment group differences for change from baseline were observed after the first 2 weeks of the randomized treatment, but Silexan, 160 milligrams per day, had a significant effect compared to placebo already after 4 weeks, whereas the difference between Silexan 80 milligrams and placebo became significant after 6 weeks. and remain significant until the end of the randomized treatment. So that was interesting for me, that this is now very similar to what we see when we use an SSRI for someone dealing with depression. We see that same response and the time of response for those folks. Beyond the primary objective of the trial demonstrating superiority and efficacy over placebo, the trial also showed on a descriptive level that Silexan was at least as efficacious as paroxetine, 40 milligrams. I forgot to put that in the slide there. One of the drugs currently recommended as first-line treatment in generalized anxiety disorder. That N for that study was 539 with a p-value of less than 0.01. And then Schwald demonstrated that the herbal oil was found to be a potent inhibitor of voltage-dependent calcium channels, VOCCs, and synaptosomes, primarily hippocampal neurons and stably overexpressing cell lines, where it showed an effect comparable to that of pregabalin. Silexan non-selectively reduced the calcium influx through several different types of voltage-dependent calcium channels, such as the N-type, PQ type, and T-type. And some authors have suggested a mechanism of action through mediation of GABA, which is important. And then lastly, this study, which I found interesting, this was specifically dealing with anxiety in a double-blind, double-dummy randomized trial. This is out of Vienna, Austria, compared anxiolytic effects of 80 milligrams of Silexan to 0.5 milligrams of lorazepam once daily. This was in 77 patients with generalized anxiety disorder. They discovered, under the hypothesis of non-inferiority of the herbal preparation, that during 6 weeks of treatment, the Hamilton Anxiety Score decreased by 11.3% in the Silexan group and 11.3%, yes, in the Silexan group and 11.6% in the lorazepam group. The adverse event in those studies, which I found fascinating, the very few adverse events found in the Silexan or the lavender arm of the study was people burped up lavender. Like, as far as side effects of a treatment for anxiety disorder, that isn't bad, right? Considering the side effects that we get, particularly as I was a medical director for a nursing home, and you get those anxious patients, and we're trying to avoid using benzodiazepines on them because it inhibits the brain, and then, of course, they fall, and they end up back in the hospital, et cetera. So this wasn't a bad deal. Lastly, I'll end with this. This is Hippocrates. We've all taken the Hippocratic Oath here. Hippocrates said, "The way to health is to have an aromatic bath and a scented massage every day." As far as I'm concerned, that's not bad advice from the father of medicine. Thank you. We have time, Mark, for one or two? Okay. Go ahead.
Do you care to comment on the research about lavender as an endocrine disruptor with the prepubertal gynecomastia? And then the second question would be to follow after that. I mean, if these chemicals are having effects on GABA, why wouldn't we expect them to have withdrawal effects just like we do with other GABA activators like lorazepam and such?
Right. So good questions. I'll say that first, as I travel in this world a little bit more, one of the things that drives me crazy is non-medical people saying, these are natural compounds, therefore they have no side effects. And I say, you don't understand. We're using these for their main side effects, just like we use medication for its main side effect. They do come with issues, right? And we need to be responsible about studying those issues. So yes, there are studies that come out, particularly in prepubertal boys, indicating that it can lead to some gynecomastia, and we follow along and we review that literature for sure. So do I recommend ubiquitous use of lavender in everyone? No. You need to know and understand these compounds and use them responsibly to the knowledge that we have. We've all dealt with pharmaceuticals that have come out through the standard FDA process that we start using in our patients, and 3 years or 5 years later we realize that, we shouldn't have been doing that, or now we're discovering these things that we now need to be more cautious about who we use them in. And yes, there's been no literature yet to talk about the withdrawal effects of these essential oils. There's nothing that has indicated that to this point, starting and stopping. I talked to my own father last night, who's been having some issues with sleep, and I said, well, Dad, are you still using the lavender oil that I recommended to you last time? And he says, no, I was using it every day for like 6 months, and then I stopped using it for some reason. I haven't used it in 3 months. I'm like, and it's weird that you're telling me you're having trouble sleeping now. So we haven't seen that, but it's certainly something to keep an eye on for sure. Yeah.
Regarding your essential oils, any basic science or research regarding these, such as double-blinded studies on efficacy, is welcome. However, a major problem, and I do mean major, is your company's distribution system relying largely on uneducated and untrained lay people prescribing and treating people, often making outrageous and undocumented claims about efficacy. Do you have any comment on how to correct that major problem?
So I agree with you, and some of the challenge has come by physicians ourselves simply dismissing any evidence that supports essential oil usage. Most of the experience has been with patients that come in and are saying, well, I use this, this, and this, which understandably we're having trouble keeping up with our own medical literature, much less this medical literature, is that they're dismissed. And so what happens is they begin, in the absence of information, my personal bias is they begin making up their own information.
Show us the evidence.
Correct. They don't have the evidence to support the things that they're doing. And we try as much as possible to control that message and let them know that that's inappropriate to do. But at the end of the day, they begin doing it themselves anyway. You're right.
Thank you for reminding us that 240 medications are from plants. Thank you. I wonder if you'd comment on capsaicin gel, C-A-P-S-A-I-C-I-N. It's used for rheumatoid arthritis, osteoarthritis, fibromyalgia. It's available over the counter. It's also available by prescription, and it's from chili peppers.
Right. So capsaicin is actually a very powerful compound. We know that capsaicin has anti-inflammatory components to it in the body. We don't know exactly where it interacts. We think it may be tumor necrosis alpha within the inflammatory cascade, but again, to this point, the literature isn't sure exactly where that specifically interacts. But capsaicin, again, is a great example of a specific molecule obtained from a plant as opposed to using the whole plant extract or the whole plant oil. And in this case, what we're finding is that as we study specific chemical compounds in the absence of the rest of the chemistry, the effect is very different. We're discovering that as you add the rest of the chemistry that the plant also creates back into that, the effect on the body is very different and actually proves to be more beneficial than isolating one specific compound from it. So I'm going to stick around during the break. I know, Mark, we need to get to a break, but I'll stick around during the break and be glad to answer any questions for you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Brannick. So we've got a break for 25 minutes. So remember to visit the exhibitors, and the bookstore is still open. We have some of the books from the speakers for today. We'll meet back here and start right at 10 o'clock. At 10 o'clock, we'll hear from Adam Schwabach, and he'll be talking on traumatic brain injuries. And then after that will be one of our two keynote speakers for the day, Scott Rigsby. And then our lunchtime keynote speaker will be Richard Gunderman. So we'll go from there, and we'll see you back at 10.